Please pray with me. God, who knows no partiality, who knows no division nor judges, stand firm with us as we do this work, this hard, hard work that we are called to do. Amen. Standing in the tragic gap. Quaker educator, activist, and writer Parker Palmer has this phrase to describe the uncomfortable, the awkward, the sometimes gut-wrenching place that we Christians are called to stand in as we hold all perspectives, all paths, and all identities with an open heart. The tragic gap. The space between what is and what should be. The place between rich and poor. The place between the privileged few and the marginalized masses. The place of the cross. The tragic gap. That spot where one avoids quick decisions, avoids hasty analysis, avoids automatic labeling, but rather just keeps listening. When standing in the tragic gap, one can simply be. Taking time to hear it all, taking time to honor it all, not giving the labels or categories that ignore the spectrum of perspectives between them. This is the tragic gap. And over the past few months, I've been struck by how our community here at Covenant has been invited into this tragic gap as we watch the painful unrest and the violence in our beloved Nicaragua, a country so dear to so many of us, where our church has a longtime sister community in the northern village of Dulce Nombre de Jesus. Our Nika Companions group here at Covenant, they know intimately right now what it feels like to stand in the tragic gap, as we've sought to hear the many and the differing reflections from our friends in Nicaragua on what has happened, why it has happened, and what justice looks like. At times, we in the Nika Companions and beyond, we haven't known what to think. At times, we've been profoundly confused. People we love and care about in Nicaragua have vastly different analyses of what is happening and why. And as we listen to each voice, we know that we are called to hold it all, to listen to each experience with love and openness, and to somehow not jump to hasty conclusions and labels. I'm finding that this is truly some of the hardest work that we are called to do. And I think many in our Nika Companions group, in particular, are feeling this mightily in these days. Indeed, to some extent, all of us are standing in this tragic gap. And if you're like me, it would be so much easier to just pick a side and stay put there. There's one narrative about the unrest in Nicaragua that goes something like this, and I thank our own Tim Groves for sending an article by John Lee Anderson of the New Yorker, who has been on the ground in Nicaragua. Anderson writes, "The strife in Nicaragua began in April after President Daniel Ortega announced cuts to Social Security benefits, along with increases in worker contributions. Tensions had been building in Nicaragua for years. Tensions over President Ortega's hold on power, his occasionally arbitrary decrees, and a widespread sense that his family and a few close companions had enriched themselves at the country's expense. And so it was this past April that students joined elderly pensioners on the streets to protest. Upon this protest, Ortega's police opened fire. Within a few days, 26 people had been killed, and that number grows and grows. As the lines of confrontation hardened, young partisans across the country blocked streets with barricades of paving stones to hold back government forces. It soon became clear that the protest actually had less to do with those cuts to Social Security in particular, but rather a deeper discontent over a president who had once been a beloved revolutionary for justice, and who now was seemingly betraying his people for the sake of his own power and wealth. I don't know about you, but when I hear this narrative, there's some familiarity to it. I think I comprehend what may have happened, and I have a feeling that I know which side I want to stand on. But then we are reminded of that tragic gap, that place where things just aren't that clear-cut. As it turns out, many of our siblings in faith in Dulce Nombre and beyond have quite a different experience of what is happening in Nicaragua. For many in Dulce Nombre, for some of our facilitators with Entre Culturas who plan our trips and provide translation services, and for folks throughout the country, they see their country as being kidnapped by those protesters. Many experience that the protesters instead have caused economic ravage to their country by placing those roadblocks throughout the land, and in their experience, it is the poor that are suffering the most. One way that we heard this described recently was the following. Because the country was kidnapped by protesters, and the free movement of people and of transportation in general was impossible, the workers could not reach their workplaces. The raw materials and merchandise could not reach their companies, and they could not sell their products with normalcy inside and outside the country, causing large losses and therefore many layoffs. So these protesters, kidnappers, or justice seekers, who is who and what is what? And what about those who fall along those many points in between? Are they being heard? As we, as a church community, seek to be in solidarity with our Nicaraguan family, we are being called to stand awkwardly, uncomfortably, somewhat painfully in that tragic gap. Avoiding quick decisions, avoiding hasty analysis, avoiding automatic labeling, and simply being the presence of love. Our reading this morning from the book of James, it tells us that if you show partiality, you commit sin. James makes this look clear-cut in today's reading because he gives us the example of showing partiality between individuals. But a situation like that in Nicaragua, that feels challenging on a whole new level. For those of us who seek to follow Jesus' way of justice, aren't we called to join the voices on the side of the oppressed? But what if the oppressed have hugely different ways of experiencing their reality? What if the oppressed are being hurt from many different sides and we don't quite know what justice actually looks like? It is in these moments that may be quite common really, that our call is to bravely stand in that discomfort, leaning in further and further to listen to stories and perspectives that challenge us, the ones that don't fit our expectations, that don't fit into our perception of what is happening. To stand in that tragic gap is to follow the call of James. And I am finding it is some of the hardest work that we can do. Faith without works is dead. This line from today's reading is likely familiar to many of us. And if you're like me, it usually brings to mind a kind of external, movement, action-oriented kind of work. Providing money, providing food, freeing the captive. It certainly is all of these things. But I also sense that this work that James speaks of, this work that comes from a place of faith, it is also the soul work. It is the soul work that allows us to dwell in the tragic gap. It is the courage to admit that we never really know the full spectrum of truth. It is the strength to dwell in the uncomfortable place of not knowing. It is the humility of listening instead of explaining. And when I try to practice it myself, oh, it feels like work. Hard work. Faith without work is dead. Faith without this hard, soul-deep work is dead. James has a hard word for us today because he is calling us into a place that will not be comfortable. Those of us trying to understand what is happening in Nicaragua and what solidarity looks like in the midst of such differing perspectives are living this acutely, as I imagine we all are in our own ways in our own times. I'm finding that the hardest work might be the slowest work. It may be the most confusing and awkward, and actually can at times be heart-wrenching as we open ourselves to a stance of not knowing all the answers. But our ancestors in faith are here to tell us that it may be the very thing that keeps us alive. If faith without this work is dead, then faith with this work is alive. Open hearts, open ears, rushing with wonder, pulsing with compassion, engaged and listening, and honestly, probably plain old confused. Welcome to the Tragic Gap, the place where we find life. Amen. I now invite you to rise on your feet or in your hearts for our second hymn, which is found in your black hymnal, which is number 294. There's a spirit in the air. And we will sing just 3 of those verses, verses 1, 6, and 7. 1,